A couple months ago, this was the exchange that Missouri Senator Josh Hawley had with Attorney General Merrick Garland over the issue of the FBI targeting Catholics, this memo that originated out of the FBI's field office in Richmond, Virginia, that talked about the domestic terrorist threat posed by Catholics who attend the traditional Latin Mass. This was the exchange.
I notice a pattern, though. The FBI field office in Richmond, on the 23rd of January of this year, issued a memorandum in which they advocated for, and I quote, the exploration of new avenues for tripwire and source development against traditionalist Catholics, it's their language, including those who favor the Latin Mass. Attorney General, are you cultivating sources and spies in Latin Mass parishes and other Catholic parishes around the country?
No, the Justice Department does not do that. It does not do investigations based on religion. I saw the document you have.
What did you do about it?
It's appalling. It's appalling. I'm in complete agreement with you. I understand that the FBI has withdrawn it, and it's now looking into how this could ever have happened.
How did it happen?
That's what they're looking into. But I'm totally in agreement with you. That document is appalling.
I'll tell you how it happened. This memorandum, which is supposed to be intelligent, cites extensively the Southern Poverty Law Center, which goes on to identify all of these different Catholics as being part of hate groups. Is this how the FBI, under your direction and leadership, is this how they do their intelligence work? They look at left-wing advocacy groups to target Catholics? Is this what's going on? I mean, clearly it is. How is this happening?
The FBI is not targeting Catholics, and as I've said, this is an inappropriate memorandum, and it doesn't reflect the methods that the FBI is supposed to be using. Should not be relying on any single organization without doing its own work.
Let me just ask you, as my time expires here, a very direct question. How many informants do you have in Catholic churches across America?
I don't know, and I don't believe we have any informants aimed at Catholic churches. We have a rule against investigations based on First Amendment activity, and Catholic churches are obviously First Amendment activity.
Well,
but I don't know the specific answer to your question.
You don't know the specifics of anything, it seems, but apparently on your watch, this Justice Department is targeting Catholics, targeting people of faith, specifically for their faith views.
Christopher Wray testified more recently. He didn't have specifics on anything either. He gave his contrived outrage about this memo as well. Pending investigation, have to get back to you about if I can release any names or other information about said investigation, who was involved with this memo, how wide-sweeping it was, and so forth. Well, some news on this. From a less redacted internal FBI document that was released yesterday by the House Judiciary Committee, chaired by Jim Jordan, the FBI's memo about Catholics was not limited to, a single person or a few people in the Richmond office. No. Didn't meet its standards, had been withdrawn, so on and so forth. We're outraged. On July 25th, the FBI provided the committee with a less redacted version of the Richmond document. Report says the information on Catholics was primarily derived from an FBI Richmond contact, an FBI Portland liaison contact who informed on a subject who gravitated to traditional Catholicism. Oh, my goodness. And an FBI undercover employee who reported on a subject who attended a Catholic church in California. So now it's Richmond, Virginia, and it's Portland, Oregon, and it's California. It also says the FBI's L.A. field office initiated an investigation into a subject, and that the Richmond office coordinated with the FBI Portland office to prepare the field report. In other words, this was a widespread bureau effort. So now the question is, not what was just going on in Richmond, what's going on across the country within the FBI? Oh, by the way, since we're on Merrick Garland and remembering the FBI's attitude towards Catholics and pro-life Catholics, like that pro-life prayer warrior whose home they raided in Pennsylvania. Brett Baer asked Christopher Wray about that, the Mark Houck raid and prosecution. which didn't go anywhere. That's what he said.
That decision to use that force, was that by the book?
So there's a whole lot of things that goes into the judgment about what is the way to conduct arrests safely and securely that are made, I think, appropriately by the career agents on the ground who have the closest visibility to the circumstances.
Feel better about the FBI? And now that you've been reminded of some of what they've offered in defense of a absurd raid, not just the substance of it, but also the basis for it, and this memo that involved many more offices and individuals than was initially reported. By the way, at what point did Chris Wray know that? And did he know that before his latest run testifying before Congress? And if he did, why didn't he disclose what he knew? They turned around and disclosed this less redacted memo July 25th. I expect that was shortly after he testified. What, he didn't know about that then? Just like he has no idea what did or did not happen on January 6th with respect to the FBI? For more on this, particularly as it pertains to targeting people that are practicing traditional Catholicism.
Oh, my God.
Holy, somebody better do something. We're pleased to be joined by Mary FioRito. She is an attorney and the Cardinal George Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Mary, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
How about this latest development, the FBI being less than forthright and the performative outrage of Garland and Wray being less than convincing, it would seem?
Well, I want to say that it's shocking and surprising, but frankly, I don't think it's either. When I was first reading about this and I saw that they specifically mention the Society of St. Pius X, and for those who aren't Catholic or who aren't familiar with that particular part of Catholicism, they're kind of even a subset among people who attend the traditional Latin Mass, and their canonical status is kind of murky because, back in the 80s, St. John Paul II excommunicated a couple of their bishops because they wouldn't come into unity in terms of doctrine and that sort of thing. So that's a really odd, granular piece of information for the FBI to have, something that even most practicing Catholics probably wouldn't be able to articulate to you very well. So when I saw that they were at that sort of level of specificity, I thought this can't just be one office. This has to be more widespread because the SXPX are not in every major metropolitan area, and certainly not in smaller areas across the country. So I thought there had to be some kind of coordinated effort, and it appears to be true.
What do you what's your general sense of the attitude toward government, particularly at the federal level and in blue states like our own here, Illinois, towards people of faith, Catholics and people of faith generally?
Well, it's clear that we're seen as suspect, right? The FBI's assessment that if you're a traditional Catholic, meaning that you prefer a style of worship on Sundays that involves the more traditional liturgy and you don't particularly like guitar masses, that somehow that means you're a potential domestic terrorist. And that there seems to be different, levels of justice for people like Mark Houck and then, people, pro-life people praying in front of an abortion clinic in Washington, D.C., two of whom I know personally were attacked 2 weeks ago. The video circulated widely on social media, and one was really beaten very badly, and the police initially said they weren't even going to press charges. So there seems to be two standards here, right? Two methods of bringing people who do things in front of abortion clinics illegally to justice, and it certainly doesn't favor the pro-life side one iota. And in fact, I think we're deliberately given harsher penalties, harsher treatment, and certainly not treated fairly.
But Mary, why would they want to target Catholics? Isn't our president Catholic?
Yeah, he's, he, as we would say in today's jargon, he identifies as a Catholic, and I can't read his heart. That's for God to judge him, but he certainly does seem to track with a far more liberal interpretation of what it means to live as a follower of Christ in his day-to-day life. Some of his actions, particularly regarding abortion, are really shocking to the conscience. He is the but-for cause of signing some executive orders that that directly led to the deaths of thousands of unborn children. And I don't know how he can, stand and say, my faith is very important to me and it guides my daily life. And on the other hand, he's signing these executive orders that essentially sentenced thousands of unborn children to death.
There's an interesting piece in The Hill by Maureen Ferguson of the Catholic Association about women and abortion, and she notes the survey that was done this past spring that finds a peer-reviewed study of 1,000 women. Most women experience a crisis during pregnancy, don't want an abortion, but they get one out of desperation. The survey found 60% of those women said they would have carried their child to term if they had greater emotional or financial support or both. Sadly, 2/3 said their decision to abort violated their own values and preferences. And yet, here we have in Illinois, Governor Pritzker signing legislation targeting pregnancy care centers and suggesting, not just suggesting, stating explicitly that they're liars and which is one accusation. That's a personal one. And also his personal interpretation of the Constitution is that you don't have a right to lie. Only he does. Your response to the climate now in Illinois with pregnancy care centers?
Yeah, that's absolutely appalling. I mean, we sort of knew that was coming. That kind of legislation has been percolating in Springfield, depending on the administration, for more than 20 years now. And, I have had the privilege of serving on the board of directors of a maternity home and pregnancy center in the Chicago area where we have cared for thousands of women, regardless of their religious background, their race, their creed, whatever. We will help any pregnant woman who comes to us. And our philosophy is that when a woman is faced with a crisis pregnancy, you eliminate the crisis. You don't eliminate the child. And there is a study that pro-abortion people like to cite fairly regularly. It's called the Turnaway Study. And that looked at 1,000 women who were turned away from having abortions for whatever reason. They couldn't get the money together in time. Their local clinic only did abortions up to 20 weeks, and they were a little bit further past that point. And when they surveyed these women a year after they couldn't get the abortions they wanted, they were suffering from emotional distress. They didn't have a support system yet. What drove them to the abortion was still present in their lives. But when they talk to the same women 5 years later, 95% of the women in that study said they were glad that the abortion didn't happen. They loved their child, they bonded with their child. Again, because the crisis that was making them consider abortion was temporary, and by that time it had resolved themselves. And they're all saying, "Wow, I'm really glad I didn't have that abortion because I have this beautiful child now." And those things, they work themselves out. So, in Illinois, I can't help but think that Governor Pritzker, what he is doing now, he wants to make sure that women don't have a choice. Their only choice is abortion. It is abundantly available. Clinics are in Illinois now advertising on their websites for abortions up to 28 weeks. That is 6 weeks past viability. Taxpayers are funding a lot of them. So, if you have a woman who is in crisis and she really needs help, and the state is dangling in front of her a free solution, to her problem, she is coerced into making a choice, as you point out, Dan, that she didn't want to make. And then she lives with regret and guilt for years and years afterwards. And so, Illinois is not a pro-choice state. It is a pro-abortion state. That is the only choice that we are supporting with our dollars and with our laws.
Well, we have this problem on the pro-life side. It manifested itself in Ohio yesterday, too. This referendum to increase the threshold required to amend the Constitution failed, so now it just takes a simple majority to this November inculcate the right to an abortion in the Ohio Constitution, which is what the pro-aborts in Ohio want to do. And this, despite the fact, pregnancy care centers, sticking on that, for example, 80% of Republicans, 72% of independents, 73% of Democrats support funding for pregnancy care centers. And yet Pritzker gets away with targeting them like we've just described. And yet we're losing referendums on this abortion on demand culture in places like Ohio and Kansas. So what is the pro-life movement and maybe by extension the Republican Party? What are we missing?
Well, I think following any kind of seismic event like the overturn of Roe, you're going to see the ship listing a little bit, right, either to the right or to the left. And I think that's what we're seeing, at least in some states, is a little bit of the listing to the left. And, generally these things tend to kind of center themselves after a time. But there's a whole number of different ways you can look at what happened in Ohio. There was a lot of hard left money that came in there, a lot of it, and we were certainly outfunded in that regard. There's no question. However, I don't think people took it as seriously as they should have. And you look at our elections here in Illinois. If people don't show up to the polls and they don't show up in big numbers, you got to live with the consequences of that. And so I think what we need to do is to sit down and to say, in what ways are we missing the message that's resonating with people? Illinois requires a supermajority to ratify a citizen-initiated constitutional amendment, and so does Florida, and so does Colorado. This is not an unusual thing.
No, of course. Well, that's sort of the point. But it was made. It was essentially made on the campaign was made a referendum question on the right to abortion, quote unquote, and 14 points in a state Trump won by 8. That should be concerning.
Oh, it should be. And there were a number of groups, the Catholic bishops in Ohio among them, from what I understand, who did not come out in favor of Proposition 1 because they said on its face it had no moral content, or, it was content neutral, which I suppose technically is true. And so they didn't weigh in on it when every headline we saw the next day said this was a clear vote on abortion. That's what the voters in Ohio thought it was, on both sides, apparently. So that there were some groups that kind of sat this one out and didn't encourage their congregations or their parishioners or what have you to get out and vote, and didn't stress the importance of it. That hurt as well. And so everybody kind of needs to get on the same page in terms of what some of these referenda, what they mean in real life, right? Not what they're just saying on their face.
And I'll tell you what, I know Leonard Leo was involved in his group, and the messaging out of the gate was muddled. They were sort of late to the dance. And this is just another lesson. The other side, the left, 24/7, constant motion messaging machine. And, we're in, we're out, we're around. We finally get around to getting engaged in something like this late, and then then sometimes the messaging isn't really on point out of the gate, and you got to make a course correction, and by that time 500,000 people have voted, and and it's just I think it's organizational as well as messaging, it seems to me, both within the pro-life movement and as it's connected to the Republican Party when it comes to initiatives like this.
Right, and that's absolutely right, Dan, and that's been a winning strategy for the pro-abortion movement. I mean, we see this right in the wake of the Dobbs decision. All of a sudden, I'm reading in the newspaper that treatment for ectopic pregnancies is now going to be illegal in some states. And the treatment for an ectopic pregnancy is not an abortion. That was a very clear point on Planned Parenthood's website until about a month after Dobbs. And I think that's indicated by the fact that Catholic hospitals treat women with ectopic pregnancies all the time, and abortion clinics don't treat women with ectopic pregnancies. So clearly it's not, an abortion. But yet that talking point was amplified and amplified and amplified. And then you had people voting in Kansas, for example, thinking that women who had ectopic pregnancies were not going to be able to be treated because of a pro-life law, and that is simply false. You look what happened in that Nebraska case last week when the young woman was sentenced to 90 days in prison. And I mean, the Rolling Stones had a headline that said, "Woman sentenced to 90 days for illegal abortion." That's not what she was sentenced for, nor charged for. She was sentenced for desecrating a corpse. She was charged with the desecration of a corpse. She gave birth to a 30-week stillborn baby in her shower, and then put it into her Weber grill with apple briquettes to set fire to it to try to conceal the smell of the human remains. And desecration of a corpse is a crime in Nebraska and every other state in the country, right? So that's what she was charged with.
And the least of her crimes.
Correct.
God.
But again, in terms of accuracy.
Yeah, right. No, I get it.
Absolutely false headline. No one corrected it. And you have people now thinking this poor young girl, sobbing, being led away in handcuffs, was convicted for having an abortion. It's not true.
Mary FioRito is an attorney and the Cardinal George Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Mary, thank you as always. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. Great to be with you again.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're talking about it, Dan and Amy are talking about it. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
This is Carol Platt-Liebau for townhall.com. Donald Trump has been indicted for the third time for what he said and did between the 2020 election and January 6th. There's plenty about Trump's conduct to criticize. But for people who claim to care so deeply about our democracy, the Biden administration, the special prosecutor, and the New York DA are inflicting serious damage on it. For any country's justice system to survive, people must believe in its fairness. The Trump prosecutions are destroying that. The New York and January 6 cases depend on legally shaky, novel applications of the law. In the documents case, only Trump is being prosecuted for activity that other officials allegedly engaged in without penalty. A special counsel was named only after Trump announced his presidential run. Indictments came in only after he took a commanding lead in the primary. This has the look of Banana Republic stuff, and it's heartbreaking for America.
Publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu.
All right, now's the time when structural problems start in your home. If you're noticing new cracks in your walls or brickwork, sinking ground or concrete, sagging floors, gaps under baseboards, sticking doors, windows, these are all symptoms of foundation problems, and it's time to call Permaseal Basement Systems. All too often, homeowners ignore these signs and then experience even bigger problems later on, which in turn cost way more to fix. So call Permaseal today. 800-421-SEAL, 800-421-7325. You can rely on an honest, accurate, and free evaluation from Permaseal's trained experts. For over 41 years, Permaseal has been Chicagoland's and Northwest Indiana's most trusted contractor for basement and foundation repairs. They've earned an A-plus rating from the Better Business Bureau and have a 4.9-star Google rating. What's not to love? For a free, thorough inspection, call our good friends at Permaseal, 800-421-SEAL. That's 800-421-7325, or visit permaseal.net.
If you want to remodel your home, there's the easy way or the frustrating way. Rick here from Forever Remodeling, and the frustrating way is how most people remodel their homes. They hire an architect and an interior designer and a builder separately. But when multiple companies work on your job, communication is a mess. Costs balloon beyond budget, and no one takes accountability if an issue pops up. Don't be like most homeowners. Choose the easy way, the Forever Remodeling way. We handle your entire remodel in-house, your blueprints, design, and construction. When every expert is under one roof, you get clear communication, total accountability, and a stunning one-time on-budget final result. Want to remodel your kitchen or bathroom, finish your basement, build an addition? Choose the easy way. Choose the Forever Remodeling way. For a free consultation, call 847-809-3355 or visit foreverremodeling.com. That's the number foreverremodeling.com.
AM 560, The Answer.
All right, coming up on Chicago's Morning Answer.
They came for your, your stove, your refrigerator,
Hot
your
water heater,
your washing machine, your dishwasher. Now for the ice cream truck in the neighborhood.
Oh, no.
At 8:38.
But now let's head into the newsroom. Here is Mike Scott.
68 degrees at 8:33. Areas of heavy and dense fog will persist until around 9 a.m. Inflation in the United States edging up in July after 12 straight months of small declines, but excluding volatile food and energy costs, so-called core inflation matched the smallest monthly rise in nearly 2 years. Wind whip wildfires sweeping the Hawaiian island of Maui have forced hundreds to evacuate. Hawaii Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke is telling tourists to alter their coming trips.
Whether it's visitors or residents, it's not a safe place for you to be. We encourage people to be safe. If you have travel plans to Maui, we ask that you postpone it or cancel it at this time.
Officials say wildfires sweeping across the western part of that island have killed at least 36. At least 24 more are hurt. Nearly 100 people in the U.S. and Australia have been arrested on child sex abuse charges. It's part of a global investigation that began after 2 FBI agents were killed 2 years ago. The Australian Federal Police announcing that 19 men there have been arrested on charges of sharing child sex abuse material online, and at least 13 children